And we will start by the first paper, will be presented by the lab.
Yes.
And the paper title is Avoiding Routing Voids with Selective Transmission Power in Underwater Wireless Sensor Network. The paper is authored by Manal Al-Bujur, Taha Baraide, and Rola Ta'am من جامعة اليموت
Okay. Hello all. So I'm here to present my paper about avoiding routing voids with selective transmission power in underwater wireless sensor networks. So an underwater sensor network mainly composed of a set of wireless sensor nodes which are distributed in a large scale environment. The sensor nodes are usually responsible for sensing the attributes of the water environment. The sensed information will be transmitted directly to a surface sink, either directly or via multi-hop communication using acoustic links. Sometimes the sense data are also transmitted directly to a mobile sink, which is usually an automated underwater vehicle, AUV. The sink then is responsible for delivering the collected data to a surface station for further analysis. So the challenges that arise for underwater sensor networks is mainly from the usage of acoustic signals for communication. The main two problems with acoustic signal is the high propagation delays and the low bandwidth. The high propagation delay, which is around, because the signal travels with the speed of sound, which is around 1500 meters per second. The low bandwidth, which is in tens of kilobits per second, if we want to compare that with the bandwidth for wireless sensor network or terrestrial wireless sensor network, which it could be in megabit per second. Also, one of the challenges that is faced by underwater wireless sensor network is the dynamic topology. Nodes, sometimes they are deployed floating, so they move with the water currents. So also the deployment architecture, the architecture is usually not usually, all the time it's 3D architecture. Also one more thing we have to pay attention to is the localization. The GPS does not work underwater. So if a node want to know its exact location, it should run a very expensive localization techniques. Therefore, the protocol designed for other networks like terrestrial wireless sensor network are not suitable for the underwater environment. So about routing, there is like categories of routing that is used in underwater sensor network. So researchers used multi-hop to reduce energy consumption. Actually, the acoustic modem consumes much higher energy than, for example, radio modems. So for transmission, it's in watts, while that in wireless, or for example, terrestrial wireless nodes, it's in milliwatts. Also, so we have to pay attention to energy expenditure in routing or any other protocol for underwater wireless sensor network. The multi-hop is good, but as if you know, it results in energy imbalancing because we are routing from the bottom of the sea up to the surface, so nodes closer to the sink will consume much energy because they are they are forwarding others' node data all the time. The other, for example, category of routing is the geographical routing. It is good for underwater. However, as we said, GPS is not supported underwater. So if you want to use this category of router, the nodes should be fixed location underwater, and this is not always the case. So researchers have switched to work on location-free protocols. An example of very famous location-unaware or location-free protocol is the depth-based routing. It's not actually totally free because it uses the depth information. But for example, but having the depth information does not require any localization techniques. It's done through a pressure sensor, which can be equipped easily with any acoustic node. Also, routing protocol should be adaptive to cope with the dynamics of underwater topology. So I'm going to talk more about depth-based routing. Depth-based routing, it's a family, I can say, of protocols. The original protocol was devised in 2008, but it was very simple, it was very famous. It has problems that other researchers try to overcome. So this protocol forwards, for example, a forwarder-based protocol. So, senders does not have to maintain routing table. It's very simple. Any forwarder who receives a copy of the packet can forward the packet if its depth is lower than the depth of the sender. As you can see, if you imagine, so if more than one node get the same copy of the packet, they both will forward this packet. Okay? So the DPR family of protocol and many of the enhancements found in literature, they struggle to obtain high stability period due to unnecessary data forwarding. Because there is too many redundant copy of the same packet arriving at the surface. So this will result in void region formation due to mobility. Nodes will be mobile and quick energy depletion. Some of the nodes will die, especially the nodes who are closer to the sink. So, okay, maybe the solution will be using a high power level. If I use a high power level, then the communication range will be larger, so I can avoid the void region formation. But this will result in a very high and unnecessary energy expenditure by senders, especially. If they use a low power level, again, I want to mention a higher power level means a wider range or a bigger range. So a low power level will result in a very low delivery ratio because the network will be disconnected at some time. So in our proposed approach, we use the simplicity of DPR, the idea of DPR. We use the depth information only to decide on the next forwarder. However, we combine that with selective power control approach so that a sender will choose the minimum power it can use for forwarding. Okay. So the nodes adaptively lower the transmission power used to reduce energy expenditure when the network is dense, and because of the movement of the nodes, some areas will be dense, the other areas will be sparse. So nodes will select the suitable transmission power for the topology of the network at the moment. So the first phase of our approach, node will start by looking for the best or the minimum transmission power to use. They will start by sending a hello packet at the minimum power level allowed. So if nodes hear this hello packet, they will reply to this sender. The sender at this point will fix, they will say, okay, I have forwarder at this power range, then this is the power range I'm gonna use. If no forwarder is found at this power level, then it will increase its power level to the next allowed power level, and again repeat this step until a forwarder is found. So after this phase could be repeated periodically right now. So in my simulation, for example, I allow that for every 100 seconds, so because the network is mobile. So after selecting the main transmission power, the nodes will, if they have data to send, it will start using the power level it selected from the first. So in this example, assume that, for example, a source node want to send a data, so it will use the minimum power level. It selects the first stage or first phase. So this power level will cover a range R1. Okay, so in this example, 3 nodes will hear the message or the data sent by S1. So the 3 nodes will wait for a holding time defined by this equation before forwarding the packet. The node with the lowest depth at this stage or at this point is N3 will have the minimum waiting time, okay, according to the equation. So this node will forward the data first before the other nodes. If the other nodes are in the same range of this node, they will hear the transmission and will refrain from sending that packet. So this way we limit number of duplicate packets. Okay, so this example here, N3 is actually did not use R1, or for example, the minimum power level which is associated with R1, so it used R2 to find forwarder, and this step will be repeated until the packet reaches the surface. So we ran extensive simulation to test our strategy. We compared our strategy, combined strategy, with two versions of DBR, depth-based routing. The first version we used a power level that is associated with 250 meter, and the other version is associated with a power range 500 meter. Our selective power DBR, we used 4 power ranges, 250, 350, 500, and 650. So as you can see, this figure shows the delivery ratio. Our strategy achieves a very high delivery ratio, around 1, very close to 1. In all cases, even we have like a very sparse network, only 40 nodes with 1 kilo by 1 kilo by 1 kilo topology, while, for example, DBR 250 has a very bad delivery ratio when the network is sparse, and it is better when the network is dense. The version that is close to ours and has a very good also delivery ratio is the DBR 500. Okay? But this comes on an expense of energy. So DBR 500 has good delivery ratio and the network stays connected, but we have a very bad, for example, energy consumption, per bit energy consumption when you compare it to our strategy. Okay, you can see that as DBR 250 is better in terms of energy consumption, but because there is no actual delivery. So nodes were not sending actual data because they were not finding forwarders. Okay. This figure shows the end-to-end delay. Actually, the end-to-end delay in our approach was a little bit higher than, for example, DBR 500, and this because we spent some time exchanging hello packets to select the minimum power level. Also, DBR 500 always uses the minimum number of hops because it will find forwarder at the highest range, so number of hops will be less than our strategy, and that's why we can see like an increase in end-to-end delay. We also measured the network lifetime. We compared our strategy with DBR 500, and we can see that there is also an enhancement in the network lifetime. So as a conclusion, this paper presents an energy-efficient void avoidance routing schema for underwater wireless sensor networks. It incorporates selective power control approach with the simplicity of a depth-based routing protocol. We used also in our simulation, when we built our channel, we used practical implementation of power control. So we built the whole physical layer channel. And we used again the receiver-based forwarding decision. Our techniques achieves a high and stable delivery ratio for both sparse and dense networks. It reduces energy consumption and enhances network lifetime with a small increase in end-to-end delays. Thank you. Any questions? I was speaking very fast, I think. I have a problem with that. Thank you.
The paper titled Implementation of a Peer-to-Peer Network Using Blockchain to Manage and Secure Electronic Medical Records. Okay. So I'm going to start my presentation with listing some of the problems that the healthcare industry suffers from. I will explain briefly what blockchain is, its most important features, and our system, and how it's going to solve some of these problems. Okay. It's impossible to overstate that the healthcare industry is one of the most important industries nowadays. No, بس صوتي عالي. Okay. Okay. Having said that, it's easily one of the slowest industries to adapt to change. Okay, to adapt to change. Okay, the first problem is lack of interoperability. So organizations hold multiple and fragmented patients' medical records. Okay. Organizations hold multiple and fragmented medical records where the patients do not own their own medical records. The second problem is that patients mismatch. A strange thing that I came across while research is that there is no university recognized patient identifier. So the inability to reliably identify patients reduces the care quality and increases the possibility for patients harm. According to the director of Center of Biomedical Informatics, John Grannis, statistics shows that up to 5 patients are mismatched within the same healthcare center, and half of the patients are being mismatched when their data is being transferred from one center to another. Okay, the next major issue is information blocking. It is imposing unreasonable constraints on the exchange of the information, which results in medical error. And it was stated that medical errors are the 3rd leading cause of death in America. Okay, before explaining how our system will solve the previously stated problems, I will explain briefly what blockchain is. So blockchain is a persistent, transparent, append-only ledger where data is added to the blockchain and never changed within it. So we can add data to the blockchain and we cannot remove. With normal, okay. So it's a system that you can add data to and never change within it. This is done through a mechanism for creating consensus between distributed parties that do not trust each other, but trust the mechanism by which the consensus has arrived at. Each block of the chain contains the data, hash of the block, and hash of the previous block. We can look at the hash of the block like it's a fingerprint, and the hash of the previous block is one of the factors that is used for maintaining the immutability of the blockchain. The consensus algorithm, let's take for example the consensus algorithm used in this system, which is proof of work. It makes the addition to the blockchain slow and hard. This makes it hard for the tamperer to tamper with the data stored on the blockchain. And since each data is replicated on each node of the network, we don't have any single point of failures. Okay. One of the most important features that is implemented in our system is smart contracts. Smart contracts digitally facilitates negotiations between parties over the blockchain. With ordinary contracts, you have to trust people to enforce rules. But in the smart contracts, rules are enforced by the computer code, where the computer code automatically runs the code and enforces its rules, which eliminates any reliance on third parties. And since smart contracts are deployed on the blockchain, they are also immutable, so we can't tamper with these rules. Okay. The built system is a decentralized application that gives the patient ownership of their own medical data, stores medical data and all its transactions in an immutable and secure way, and connected to the large off-chain data, which is secured via public-private encryption, and all its hashes are also stored on the blockchain. Okay, the design requirements are that medical records must be stored securely and kept secret from unauthorized. Every transaction must be recorded on the blockchain. If it's creation of a new record, access request, deny or grant access. The patient decides who is authorized to view and add records. Any hospital should be able to view medical records added by other hospitals by the approval of the patients, and users should be authenticated. The patient should be able to access all his fragmented records, and users of the system must be able to interact with the blockchain in a user-friendly way. Okay. The developed design solves the problem of information blocking, where patients give access to doctors and specialists anywhere while keeping it secure, enabling doctors to make the most informed decision possible for the patients. Data being stored on the blockchain adds security benefits, since data and transactions are distributed and encrypted. And there is no central place for a hacker to breach the security of the data and gain access. Okay. Regarding patient's mismatch, each patient's unique ID will be generated by SHA-256, which is a hash encryption algorithm, which has an output that is enough to make sure that no patient mismatch happens. Okay. Uh, 3 minutes. Okay. Decentralized, okay. So as we can see, decentralized applications are a new type of web applications that run on top of the blockchain. To the end user, it may not feel or any different than the other applications that are used today. However, decentralized applications are powered by blockchain, which is very different. Where the front end is written in a language that can handle back-end codes, and to its back-end, namely JavaScript, is back-end code runs on decentralized peer-to-peer network. This system runs on Ethereum network, which is a public, permissionless, transparent network. So current browsers cannot run decentralized application within like Chrome or Firefox. So extension is used, which is a cryptographic wallet. This cryptographic wallet transfers the browser, let's say Chrome, to an Ethereum browser that can deal with the blockchain and retrieve data from the blockchain, and can securely manage identities and sign transactions. Okay. Looking at this diagram shows the architecture of the built system. First of all, I started with building the smart contracts. I used the Solidity programming language, which is the main programming language for building smart contracts in Ethereum. The most important step is to test these smart contracts, because once they are deployed, they can never be changed. So they must be tested in different ways to ensure that they work as intended, and to make the code more optimized, because for each line it needs gas, and there is a limit for the gas, namely 6,721,975, and argon. Okay. The environment used in the system is Ganache local blockchain. It is the same as the mainnet, but we don't need any real money to generate fake accounts. Then the network and all its related issues were configured. The front end communicates with the blockchain architecture through Web3.js library, which is an Ethereum API that can invoke the smart contracts functions. Okay, here it's a representation for the blocks and transactions information, which includes the addresses of the sender and receiver, gas used, the hash. We talked about the nonce. Okay. This slide contains hints of the decentralized application interface for the patient. It shows some analysis of the patient's data, where the blockchain we can store all of the patient's data, so we can make easily any analysis or long-term studies. Okay, two slides, okay. Okay, for the users to sign into the system, the cryptographic wallet will be used, which will make the login process much more secure and easier, because for an account to be imported, it needs a 12-phrase word, which is way more secure because no one could activate an account for someone else. And for payment, the system offers payment for doctors directly with the Ethereum cryptocurrency without the need of intermediary.
Thank you. Questions?
About my paper, an enhanced energy efficient coverage protocol for wireless sensor network. Let's start with an introduction. A wireless sensor network, or WSN, it is composed of small sensors designed to collect, process, and transmit data. One of critical challenges in WSN is energy conservation. Because of recharging or replacing the battery may be impossible. To extend the network lifetime and achieve the best coverage, most energy efficient coverage solution is detect the redundant sensor and move them to the sleep mode. This is done using the coverage redundancy algorithm, or CRA. The CRA used to or leads to detect or determine the next state of the node, if it will be active or sleep. However, the changing in the node state leads to more power consumption because of repeat transaction and running the CRA, or coverage redundancy algorithm, which is consume more power from the node energy. Here let's talk about the node status. We have discovery, sleep, and active. The node starts with the discovery state, and it's run the CRA to determine it to move to sleep mode or active mode. After it's determined and moved to the next state, after a while, most of algorithm move back to the discovery state and run the CRA again, and so on. The switching between states from discovery to active to sleep in most scheduling algorithms is frequent and dynamic, and the sensor may uselessly perform a sequence of switching to finally find out that it should be simply remain on its initial state. Also, the CRA is continuously executed by a sensor at the beginning of each round to decide the next scheduling transmission. Here, for example, the node starts in discovery state, then it runs the CRA, then it's determined to be in the sleep state. After sleep state, it moves back to discovery state and runs CRA and determined to be active node, and so on. The running of the CRA algorithm and changing the state, which is consume more power from the sensor energy. Stable and predictive energy-aware coverage scheduling or SPEC protocol is an example that protocol that use one-way scheduling behavior. Also, it's have a new workup strategy to adjust the sleep timer according to the active sensor engine. Also, it's it has a reduction procedure, which is proposed to reduce the number of running the CRA. The most or the main idea with the SPEC is the sensor stay in active state until it exhausted. SPEC use timers like sleep timer or T-sleep to sleep before beginning a new round, activity timer to spend in active state, and active threshold timer, which is to enter the exhausted state. This figure view the state of specs and how it moves between states. It starts in the discovery state, then run the CRA to determine the next state. The node, if it moves to the active state, it sends an active message to all neighbors and stay in the active state until the T activity time be less than or equal to act threshold, which is move the node to the exhausted state. When the node in the discovery state and receive active message from more neighbors that cover all the disk area of its sensing area, then it's moved to the sleep mode, to be in the sleep mode until one of the neighbor energy has expired and moved to the exhausted state. Then it moved back to the discovery state to run the CRA and determine if it should be moved to the sleep state again or moved to the active state. The prediction procedure, here, let's move to the next slide. The type of neighbors, we have the, let's see here, we have the sensor I, we have the sensing range, which is R, the radius of the sensing range, and we have 2R, which is the double of the sensing range. The nodes that in the internal circle, like S internal here, and we have another neighbor which is external between the distance between R and 2R, and we have the opposite external which is in the, or also it's external. When the sensor receive an active message from a neighbor that be in the internal area, the sensor then it run the CRA immediately. If the neighbor in the external area, the sensor did not run the CRA immediately, but it wait until it has received an active message from another external sensor from the opposite area or opposite square. This will help to reduce the number of running the CRAs and will save more energy of the sensor. We make some enhancement in the SPEC protocol to avoid power loss and extend the network lifetime. When the node finds that each space of its area is covered by more than one node, it will set the sleep timer for longer time. The node will predict that its sleeping neighbor will wake up and cover the area. We have 3 cases in our protocol. Case 1, sleep for 1 round, which happens when the node is redundant and there is some area in its disk is covered by only 2 nodes. Then we set the sleeping time for T-sleep. The second state, sleeping for 2 rounds or long time. This when the node is redundant and the area in the disk or in the sensing disk of its this node is covered by more than 2 nodes. Then the node will set the sleep for double T-sleep of the normal T-sleep. And the third case to be in active state when the node is not redundant. In the simulation we used MATLAB with this parameters that listed in the table. We used a network that have a high number of sensors. Here we show the network lifetime, which is the logarithm of the network that have energy more than 0 over the nodes at t equals 0. We compare our result, which is in the blue line, with the spec, which is in the green line, and the spec without the reduction procedure that I talked about in the previous slide. The next is switching energy, which is the sum of switching of the energy needed to switch the state of the nodes for each round. At the first round, the switching energy of our proposed protocol is much less than the spec and spec without reduction procedure. Then it's move back up again and so on. The next figure is the computation energy, which is the energy need to run the CRA by each node. Almost the same result of the previous image. And finally, the coverage degree, which is the nodes, number of nodes at the state that have state equal active on the number of nodes that have state equal active when the time equals 0. Any questions?
Technology, LoRa is a very promising wireless technology, so we will talk about a simple and efficient way for selecting the LoRa parameters. So I will talk at the beginning. I will give a quick introduction about LoRa technology. We will talk a little about the literature and some technical background, and then I will describe the methodology we used for LoRa parameter selections, and we will present some of the experimental evaluation and conclusion and future work. So I don't know if you hear about LoRa. So LoRa is a wireless technology that has certain characteristics which make it very suitable for some applications like wireless sensor network, the Internet of Things, and many other current applications. The unique thing in this technology that it consumes very low energy, okay, and it can give you long range. So it stands for low energy and long range wireless technology. The problem on this technology that it gives you also low bit rate, so it's not fast. But think about some applications like in the Internet of Things or wireless sensor network. You don't need high bandwidth in most of the applications, since you only need maybe to send the sensor data or few bytes, which reflect certain measurements that you are taking. But the most important thing in this application is to have very efficient protocol in terms of energy consumption and also being able to send data over long distances. So this is why LoRa is getting some momentum in Jordan and worldwide, since it will be a very good technology for the Internet of Things and for wireless sensor networks. By the way, recently LoRa is being authorized in Jordan, so you can use it. However, you need to pick the right frequency. So we will see later it works in the 433 megahertz and in the 868 megahertz and in the 912 megahertz. Obviously, the 900 megahertz you can't use in Jordan, since it's occupied by the telecom operators. And the 433 megahertz, it's reserved for the military long time ago. So they decided to use the 868 megahertz, like in Europe. In the US, for example, they are using the 900 megahertz, since the telecom operator are not using the 900 megahertz. And by the way, if we think about it, compared, for example, with Wi-Fi, so Wi-Fi is using the gigahertz frequency. So when we go down to the megahertz frequency, we were able to get the long distance and long range, which is one of the most important characteristics of LoRa technology. So in LoRa, so again, it's a proprietary spread spectrum modulation scheme that is deviated of chirp spread spectrum modulation. So there is something called CSS. I will not go into the details of this modulation, but simply it defines a chirp and it varies the chirp width. This is what we call the spreading factor. So we have four main parameters we can tune and adjust for LoRa. And these parameters will more or less determine the performance of this protocol. And this is what we are interested in, to find a way to choose the most suitable parameters that is suitable for our application or for your application. So we have four main parameters. The first one is called the spreading factor, and it will vary from 6 to 12 in a step of 1. So you can say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So there are different combinations, choices. The bandwidth, and we have three choices, 125, 250, and 500 kilohertz. The coding rate, the CR, so we have also 5 choices. Of course, the coding rate, it has to do with the reliability. So when you increase the coding rate, that means you are putting more bits for error correction, and and this will improve the reliability, but of course it will increase the overhead. And finally, the carrier center frequency. As we said, there are three choices, the 433, 868, and 900. Of course, when you go up with the frequency, the packet loss become, or let us say, the distance become shorter. And when you go down in the frequency, the communication distance become higher. Of course, when you increase the frequency, the packet loss, and let us say, the degradation in the signal become more due to the path loss that we have in the wireless channel. So there are a trade-off between how we choose and play with these parameters in order to achieve our methodology. So this is kind of summary how changing these parameters will affect. So if we increase the spreading factor, for example, the range, the communication range will be increased. RB is the bit rate. The bit rate will be decreased. The receiver sensitivity, or what we call it, the RSSI, will increase, and the packet loss will decrease. While if we increase the bandwidth, the communication range will decrease, the bit rate will increase, and the RSSI will decrease, and the packet loss will increase. So it's kind of, a trade-off. So you cannot gain always, and you cannot lose, and you need to find, what's the best choice for these parameters in order to obtain the performance you are looking for. So this is kind of the summary of the methodology we are using. So say for example, we have these different configurations for LoRa, and we need to know which one to choose, okay? So what we will do first, we will determine the configuration that you are interested in and the choices that we can use. For example, if we cannot use the 433 and 900 megahertz, then it's not a choice. So we will omit it out of our choices. So we will put the possible choices that we can use and we are interested in investigating. And then we either conduct a practical experiment in the area of interest. And why we need to conduct practical experiments in the area of interest, since you can for sure know, let us say, the terrain and the nature of the area of interest that you are interested in. So this will give you a better estimation of the transmission quality in this area of interest. it's better than just, it's like when you do a site survey and you know the terrain and the area, and so you kind of have a good perception about the channel that you have and that you will encounter. And after you conduct several experiments, of course using different configurations, you either calculate or measure the performance parameters. And why I say either calculate or measure, since some parameters you can measure easily, and others it's difficult to measure, so we can use mathematical equations that exist in the literature to give us the performance indications. For example, the sensitivity, for example, one of these parameters, there are some lookup tables that you can use according to your configurations and get this value. For example, the packet loss, this is something you can measure easily, since you can count the number of lost packet and number of transmission packet, and then you can determine the packet loss. And then you will ask if you have more then you can ask if you have, or you will ask yourself if I have more parameters configuration to try. If not, you will put the results of all the performance metric you have obtained either by measurements or by estimation using mathematical equation. You will put it on something what we call it the spider diagram. But before that, you have to adjust and normalize the performance parameters, since we need to compare different parameters. So we need kind of to normalize the parameters in order to be able to compare and put them on one figure. Then we will draw them in. We will draw all the possibility in the radar diagram, or what we call the spider diagram. I will explain it in a few minutes. And according to this spider diagram or radar diagram, we can visually see the best configuration, for example, that give us the largest opening in the spider diagram or in the radar diagram. And according to this, we can determine that this is maybe the best combinations and configuration we need for our application. So again, the nice thing in this methodology is that it's simple, it's not difficult. And so this is what we call it the radar diagram or the spider diagram. So it's used in many applications in economics, in financial. So the idea here, you define in the axis the metric you are interested in. Okay, in our example, for example, we have the bit rate, we have packet loss, we have RSSI. So in each of these, let us say, axes, you will define the metric of interest. And then, for example, this is a real example we did. So here, as you can see, we define 4 different metrics: the bit rate, the inverse of the packet loss, not the packet loss, the inverse of the packet loss, the inverse of the absolute value of the RSSI, and the absolute value of the sensitivity. And why we sometimes put RB and then sometimes we put the inverse, since we need the metric to be representative to the good performance. So the higher the value, the better the performance. So for example, if you have a higher bit rate, that means it's better. When you have lower packet loss, so the inverse will be higher. So that means I should use the inverse. The same here for RSSI and for the S. And as I said, we have to normalize. Otherwise, you cannot, for example, put different numbers with different units in the same diagram. It looks ugly, and you cannot visualize it together. And from this diagram, you can, for example, if I am interested in the configuration, which gives me the best bit rate and the best maybe sensitivity and the best RSSI, and maybe I'm not concerned about packet loss, then I can visually see the best spider diagram, which give me the highest value from each configuration. Of course, it's not always clear and easy to get that, and this is what we are working now, that you may have some constraints. So if you have some constraints, then we will modify the algorithm to also help you in choosing the best configurations given your constraints. Without such a method, it's not easy to formulate it mathematically, and it's a complex optimization problem. And many people, since if you think about the number of choices, they are very large. If you multiply all the different variations, it will be very large. So basically, more or less, this is the idea of the paper. It's, as I said, it's simple, it's easy, and yeah, so for example, expanding forward the edge means better results. As we can see, if the researcher is looking for the best trade, then he will choose the second configuration. For the best power loss, configuration 5 is the best. The best sensitivity, configuration 6 is chosen. For the best RSSI, configuration 3 is best. And if you have multiple, constraints, then you need also to see the best diagram which kind of combine these multiples. Again, the more complication comes when you have constraints, then you can put it on the diagram and find out the best configurations. We did experimental tests, since, as I said, part of our methodology is to use and to do experimental tests, and that was done in German Jordan University. In the area around the university, inside the university, there are some agricultural areas, so we need to test the LoRa technology in this area. And we did a lot of experiments, so these are the configurations I'm looking for. So for example, bandwidth 500, code rate 4/5, and the spreading factor, we varied from 7 to 12. And then we choose different configurations, and we conduct these experimental evaluations for different distances. And after that, we came up with the different results and different configurations and put them on the, on the spider diagram or radar diagram to find out the best configurations. As I said, yeah, that was the main idea of the paper. And now we are working on putting more complicated scenarios on this radar diagram. So as a conclusion, this paper demonstrates a methodology which helps researchers on selecting the most suitable combinations of different LoRa configuration parameters, mainly the spreading factor, bandwidth, and the code rate. In future, we are working toward adding several constraints while choosing the best LoRa configurations. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed.
You have questions?
Any questions?